Have you ever uncovered something that shattered the world you thought you knew? What if you found out that the person closest to you had been hiding secrets so dark they could change everything? Hope Swan was about to discover the truth, and once she did, her life would never be the same again. Hope Swan stood at the base of their apartment building, watching her husband, Stephen, leave for yet another business trip. The cold November air stung her cheeks, a mirror to the chill she felt growing in her heart. As she kissed him goodbye, something about their parting felt off. Stephen's restless demeanor, the quick peck on her cheek, and his lack of attention to her words, it all seemed so distant. She had long been used to the irritable side of her husband, especially before a trip, but this time there was something else in his eyes. "Will you call me when you get there?" Hope asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if she was trying to bridge a growing gap between them. Stephen gave her a distracted, yeah, but his gaze shifted past her, his mind already elsewhere. For years, Hope had noticed the subtle changes. The spark in their relationship had dimmed long ago, replaced by routine, distance, and silence. But today, the sharp edge of his indifference felt different, like an unspoken confession. As the taxi pulled away, Hope stood frozen on the sidewalk, shivering more from the void between them than the winter air. She headed inside, pushing open the door to their empty apartment, and the quietness felt louder than it ever had before. She sighed and shook off her coat. The space they once shared felt like a shell now, hollowed out by years of unspoken words. Hope made herself a cup of tea, something to calm the growing unease in her chest. But as she walked into Stephen's office to grab a quiet moment, she noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar. Stephen was always protective of his space, always locked it before leaving. Yet curiosity tugged at Hope's chest as she stepped inside Stephen's office, the room that had long been off limits, his personal sanctuary. The familiar scent of his cologne lingered, but something felt different. There was a sharp, unfamiliar fragrance in the air. It was rich and musky, a stark contrast to the one he typically wore. She stopped for a moment, her heart beating a little faster. The room was in disarray. Papers were scattered across the desk, and the leather planner he had meticulously kept was open, pages flung carelessly across the surface. She couldn't remember the last time it had looked like this. She looked around for a moment, wondering if maybe it had just been a rushed departure. Maybe Stephen had forgotten to tidy up before leaving. But as she began to pick up the stray papers, a crumpled receipt caught her eye. It was from a fancy downtown restaurant called Moonlight. The price was circled in red, the total amount enough to make Hope pause. It was more than she spent on groceries in a month. The receipt was dated for last Friday, the same day Stephen had claimed to be stuck in a meeting. Business dinner, he had told her then. Of course, it could be, but the mounting pile of small lies she'd been swallowing over the past few months made her question everything. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid the receipt aside, but then something caught her attention again. A business card, bent at the corners, sat underneath the receipt. It was from a spa, Aphrodite, and written in hurried ink on the back was an appointment time Wednesday at 3 p.m. Romantic package. Her stomach dropped. That was 3 weeks ago, the day Stephen had said he was too busy with meetings to call her back. A chill ran down her spine as the truth began to take shape. Her mind raced back to the distant look in Stephen's eyes that morning, to his quick, distracted goodbye. Could it be? Was there more to his work trips than he had let on? Just then, Hope's phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a text from Ethan, their 22-year-old son. "Mom, I'm not coming home this weekend. Swamped with schoolwork, love you. See you next weekend." She smiled faintly at the message. Her son, always so busy, just like his father. But she couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. A loneliness that wasn't just the result of her son's absence, but from the growing distance she felt between herself and Stephen. Her gaze returned to the desk. She opened the next drawer, her hands moving mechanically now. The drawer was locked. That was strange. Stephen had never locked his drawers before. Was it out of precaution? Or was he hiding something? Her heart began to beat faster as she thought of the possibility. What could he be hiding? Hope's mind raced, but she pushed aside the unsettling thoughts, determined to find an explanation that made sense. It was just a drawer, after all. Yet the unease in her gut wouldn't let her go. She knew something wasn't right. She glanced around the room, hoping for some sign of clarity. Then her eyes landed on the small key ring hanging behind a framed painting on the wall. She had seen it before, but today something made her pause. The key was there for a reason. She reached up and grabbed it, her fingers brushing against the cold metal, and for a moment her heart skipped a beat. Something told her that unlocking this drawer would change everything. With a deep breath, she inserted the key into the lock and turned. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside were several folders stacked neatly, but one caught her eye. It was plain cardboard, marked with the word contracts. She pulled it out carefully, scanning the contents. At first glance, they seemed to be standard business documents, contracts, agreements, and estimates related to the construction company. Nothing too surprising. But then she noticed the numbers. The amounts were far higher than she expected. Large sums, numbers she didn't recognize, all tied to different subcontractors. She flipped through the documents, but nothing seemed to make sense. The more she read, the more the weight of these papers grew in her hands. Was this just typical business, or was there something more? The next folder was labeled personal, and a pang of anxiety shot through her chest. This one was their family folder, filled with photos, documents, and personal memories. She pulled it open with trembling fingers and smiled faintly when she saw an old, sun-bleached photo of their family. Ethan was just 5 years old, grinning with a gap in his teeth, holding a sunflower in their garden. Hope's heart squeezed as memories flooded her mind, a time when things were simpler, when their family seemed whole. But there, beneath the photo, was something else. A folded piece of paper. She unfolded it, and her eyes skimmed the words urgent. Immediate consultation with a cardiologist recommended. Hope's blood ran cold. The document was from a month ago. Her hands shook as she held it. Stephen had never mentioned anything about a health issue, especially not something as serious as this. Why was he hiding it? What was he really afraid of? Her mind was racing now, heart pounding in her chest. Why hadn't he told her? What else had he been hiding? And as if that wasn't enough, the third folder made her stomach drop. It was labeled simply CR, and it seemed to pull her deeper into a nightmare she wasn't prepared for. Hope's hands trembled as she opened the third folder, the one labeled simply CR. She knew it wasn't just a random label. It had to mean something. As she flipped through the contents, her breath caught in her throat. The first document was a property deed for an apartment in a luxurious building on Madison Avenue, the Imperial Residence. It was an upscale address, one she had never heard of before. Her mind raced. Why hadn't Stephen told her about this apartment? They had talked for years about moving to a new place, but it was always something they'd put off. Yet here it was, an apartment Stephen owned in a building she had never seen, bought only 3 months ago. Her fingers skimmed over the details. The deed was signed by Stephen. A surge of panic gripped her chest. Why had he kept this from her? Had their whole life together been a lie? Hope flipped through the rest of the folder. A contract with a luxury furniture showroom for a complete living room and bedroom setup. Receipts from high-end stores for linens, furniture, even a smart home installation, all dated within the last 2 months. She felt a wave of nausea rise in her throat. This was all new, all expensive. It made no sense. They were struggling. How could he afford this? And then, as her fingers continued to move, she found something that made her heart stop. A business class plane ticket to Miami. It was for Stephen and someone named Christina Anderson. The flight was booked for the coming week. She stared at the ticket, trying to process what it meant. Christina. Who was she? Why had Stephen booked a trip with her? A sinking feeling hit the pit of Hope's stomach. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably now. She kept flipping through the folder, unable to stop herself. But the more she read, the more the ground beneath her seemed to shift. A bank statement showing a large wire transfer to an overseas account. A loan agreement for $500 from Wells Fargo. She had no idea about any of this. How could Stephen have kept this from her for so long? And then the final blow photographs. A series of glossy pictures featuring Stephen with a young woman, a tall, blonde, strikingly beautiful woman. There they were, smiling in a fancy restaurant, then at the beach, and finally standing outside that very apartment on Madison Avenue. Stephen was holding the keys, his arm around her waist. The woman, Christina. Hope felt the weight of everything crash down on her all at once. 27 years of marriage, all of it a lie. She slammed the folder shut and sat back in the chair, her mind spinning. She was living in a nightmare, and she didn't know how to wake up. The room seemed to close in on Hope as she sat in her husband's office, staring at the folder she had just closed. The reality of the situation was too much to bear. Her entire life, everything she had known and trusted, was now in question. Stephen, the man she had shared her life with, the father of her son, had been living a double life. The betrayal was not just emotional, it was financial, criminal even. Her heart raced as she tried to process the flood of thoughts that were crashing through her mind. She stood up and paced around the room, unable to sit still. Her hands trembled as she thought of the lies, the secrets Stephen had kept hidden from her, the apartment, the money, the woman. Christina. She couldn't stop the tears from streaming down her face. How had she not seen it? How had she missed all the signs? Or had she just been too blind, too trusting? She felt the sharp sting of betrayal cut deeper with each passing second. Hope wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. She couldn't stay in this room any longer. She needed to leave, to think, to make sense of everything. As she moved to the door, her eyes landed on the stack of ungraded papers on the desk, essays from her students. It felt so distant, so irrelevant now, yet somehow it grounded her. She had work to do. There were still responsibilities, still students depending on her. But how could she focus on that when her entire world was falling apart? She stepped out of the office and into the empty hallway. The quiet of the apartment was suffocating, the silence louder than the chaos in her mind. She needed someone to talk to. She needed answers. And the only person she could think of who might help her was her best friend, Taylor. Hope quickly grabbed her phone and dialed Taylor's number. She waited anxiously as the line rang, her heart pounding in her chest. When Taylor answered, Hope's voice cracked with emotion. Taylor, I need you. I need to talk to you. What's wrong? Taylor asked, concern immediately lacing her voice. Hope could hear the shift in her tone, the instant realization that something was terribly wrong. I don't know how to explain this. Hope began, her words tumbling out in a rush. I found something in Stephen's office, something that's going to change everything. He's been lying to me. He's been living a double life. He's cheating on me. And I think he's involved in something illegal. Taylor paused, processing her words, then spoke firmly. I'm coming over. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just breathe, okay? I'm here. We'll figure this out. Hope hung up the phone and paced the apartment, trying to calm her nerves. Taylor had always been her rock. She had been through so much with her, through good times and bad. Hope needed her now more than ever. Taylor arrived quickly, her concerned expression matching Hope's anxiety. Hope led her to the kitchen, where she poured a shot of whiskey for both of them. Stephen's cheating, and I think he's involved in something much worse. Hope whispered. Taylor listened carefully as Hope explained what she'd found, the receipts, the apartment, the photos of Stephen with Christina. Taylor's accountant mind processed the documents. This is huge, Hope. This looks like fraud. And if Constantine is involved, we may be looking at something much darker. Hope knew she needed more answers. What do we do now? She asked Taylor, her voice shaky. Why need more proof? Taylor said decisively. We check that apartment, we find out who Christina is, and we find Constantine. With a plan in place, the two women set out to the apartment on Madison Avenue. They made their way past the concierge, who confirmed Stephen's presence. When they approached the door, a neighbor casually mentioned Christina, Stephen's wife. Hope's world collapsed. Stephen had been telling people Christina was his wife. Hope's heart pounded as they left the building. He's been living a double life, she muttered. Taylor urged her to stay calm. We need to focus on the next step. Let's find Constantine. He's the key. Later that night, they contacted Constantine's sister, Olivia, who confirmed Constantine had uncovered massive corruption at Cedar Construction before his death. Olivia revealed Constantine had faked his death with help from a friend. He's alive, he's in hiding, Olivia said. Hope was stunned. He knew too much about Stephen, about all of them, she whispered, determined to uncover the truth. Hope and Taylor set out to find Andrew Parker, Constantine's friend. Andrew confirmed the fraud scheme and the cover-up, urging Hope to gather all the documents before Stephen returned. Hope worked through the night, copying every document she found in Stephen's office. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. Just as she finished, Andrew warned her, Stephen is coming back early. You need to leave now. Hope packed quickly, her hands shaking. She knew it was only a matter of time before Stephen found out what she had uncovered. The next day, Hope and Taylor met at the old boathouse as planned. But when they arrived, the place was eerily empty. They waited, heartbeats thudding in their ears, until a figure emerged from the shadows. It wasn't Constantine. It was Stephen. He had been tracking her phone. Stephen's face was cold, his voice flat. You've made a huge mistake, Hope. Where are the documents? Hope's heart raced as she realized she was trapped, but Taylor stood firm. We don't have them, and we're calling the police. Just then, two men appeared behind Stephen. The situation was escalating. Hope's pulse quickened as she wondered what Stephen would do next. Come with us, Stephen ordered, his voice laced with authority. Hope and Taylor exchanged a glance. No, Taylor said sharply. We're not going anywhere. Stephen's eyes darkened. You don't have a choice. Hope felt the weight of his words. Her life, her son's future, was hanging in the balance. Stephen and his men forced Hope and Taylor into a car. They were headed to Charles Hardin's estate. As the car sped away, Hope tried to keep calm, but fear gnawed at her insides. Who is this man? She asked Andrew Parker, who was sitting beside her. Hardin is the head of Cedar Construction. He's the one running everything, Andrew replied, and he's going to want answers. At Hardin's mansion, Hope was led into a grand office where Hardin awaited. He smiled coldly. I've heard you've been snooping into our business, he said, his tone mocking. But let's be honest, you're out of your depth. Hope's fury surged. I know what you've been doing. I know about the fraud, the cover-up, and Constantine. Hardin's expression remained unchanged. So what now? Stephen stepped forward, his voice bitter. We need those documents back. Now, Hope stood tall. You can't intimidate me anymore. I've seen the truth. Hardin's smile widened. You don't know what you're getting into, Hope. You think you can walk away from this? Hope's heart pounded. The stakes were higher than ever. Suddenly, the office doors burst open. An FBI team flooded the room, guns drawn. Everyone freeze, the lead agent shouted. Hope couldn't believe her eyes. The truth was finally coming out. Stephen Hardin and their associates were arrested on charges of embezzlement, money laundering, and attempted murder. Hope watched in stunned silence as Stephen was handcuffed. She felt a mix of relief and disbelief. After everything, it was finally over. But even as she stood there, watching her husband's world crumble, a part of her wondered about the man she once loved, the man she thought she knew. The following months were a blur of legal battles and media attention. Hope faced her fears, standing strong for herself and Ethan, who was struggling with the aftermath of the scandal. She couldn't escape the whispers or the judgment, but she refused to let them define her. She was no longer the wife of a criminal. She was Hope Swan, a survivor. Through it all, Taylor remained by Hope's side, offering unwavering support. Hope's son, Ethan, eventually returned to school. determined to rebuild his life. And then, out of the blue, Konstantin appeared. He reached out, offering Hope a chance to rebuild hers as well. "Join my company," Konstantin offered. "We need honest people like you, people who fought for what's right." At first, Hope hesitated. She had always been a teacher, but this opportunity felt like the fresh start she needed. After much thought, she accepted. Konstantin's company, Renaissance, was built on integrity. Together, they worked to complete the projects Stephen's company had abandoned. Slowly, Hope began to feel like she was making a real difference. As she worked with Konstantin, their connection deepened. They found strength in one another, both healing from the past, and in time, something more began to blossom between them. Their partnership grew not just in business but in life. Konstantin had been through his own trials, and Hope admired his resilience. And slowly, their bond shifted from professional to personal. One evening, after a long conversation, Konstantin placed his hand gently over hers. "I never believed in fate," he said softly, "but I think everything that happened led us to this moment." Hope smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Maybe it did," she whispered, not pulling away. With each passing day, Hope realized that no matter how painful the past had been, it had led her to this moment of clarity. She was stronger, wiser, and ready for a new chapter. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps us creating powerful stories like this one. Stay tuned for more. The next one is just around the corner.